This podcast is brought to you by the School of Advanced Study, University of London. All of our podcasts are available from our website, www.sas.ac.uk.
Okay, let's begin. As I said, a few people have said that they, through illness or other things, can't make it, and Helga is on her way. But we'll just start. And welcome to our new participant. We had our introduction 2 weeks ago, in which we looked at the context of Geist, Utopie, looked at the neo-Kantian or Kantian roots that you can see in Bloch's very early engagement with philosophy. We looked at the letter that he wrote to Ernst Mach at the end of the beginning of the 20th century. And then we talked a little bit about the main themes in Bloch's work, the historical development, this idea of utopia, or of the not yet, the world as consisting of a process towards something that doesn't exist yet and has to be created in the process, and it can nevertheless be thought of as, in a way, a goal, or a telos, not in the sense of a teleology as a preset goal that exists, but a goal that determines and emerges itself in the process of its own arrival, and that Bloch sees history as, in a way, or also human life as, in a way, a movement, a process towards this state or this situation that might be called identity, as he sometimes calls it, or it might be called home, Heimat, or it might be called also an adequacy between essence and existence. And there are many other figures in his writings that try to articulate what this is, Heimat, a big part of reading Bloch is to try and understand what that point really is, what it means, and that's what we're concerned with in this book, the first published book. We've also talked about the different versions of the text that exist. That's an important thing that will keep coming back. I don't know if you have had the opportunity to compare a little bit the 1918 and the 1923 versions. Well, in English there's only the 1923 text. But for those of you who also have the 1918 text, I think you will already have seen in the passages that we've read for today that there are quite significant differences in choice of words, and also in certain elements or certain paragraphs that are simply missing, or in either one of those versions. So we could talk about what that means. And the purpose of today will be to discuss the text that we have prepared, which is basically the beginning of the book. So the Absicht, the intention, and then the first chapter of the Selbstbegegnung, the self-encounter. First we have this section on der Krug. How is that translated in English? The old jar, or?
Pitcher.
The pitcher, yeah, that's a good word, yeah. So this thing about the pitcher. And then we have the text, die Erzeugung des Ornaments, and that is translated as the
production of the ornament.
The production of the ornament, yeah. And so in this book, and I said this last time, this book, which is a curious mixture of, let's say, perennial philosophy, because it deals with the final questions. It tries to instill, and that's also what makes it, I think, interesting to read in today's philosophical context. It tries to instill a sense of the urgency of the question of what Bloch calls the question of the Überhaupt, of that which is absolute, or which is unqualified. And at the same time, it is placed very concretely in the cultural historical context of its time. And I think you see that in a lot of texts by Bloch. That is somehow that's the place from which he writes. I think Benjamin, in a text from the 1920s about the essay, says something about the fact that this is also the nature of the essay as a form, that it is a combination of inscribing yourself in a cultural tradition and at the same time talking about things within the context of daily life or cultural production that have to do with what is eternal, what is ultimate. And in that short text he also mentions Bloch as the most important essay writer of the time. And I think that is because you see this particular quality so very clearly in Bloch's writing. There's another text which in this context is interesting, which we looked at a couple of years ago in this seminar, Adorno's text on the essay as form, in which Adorno also talks about these things. So that's maybe one of the things to keep in mind. And it necessitates a very careful form of reading, and that's what I think we want to do in this seminar series, is to really go into a close reading of this text, because I was already talking to a few of you before the seminar, and I think the word that sort of predominated was the word weird, that this is a very weird text. And I was just saying, I was visiting Sam. I visited Sam last week in Berlin, and he started to read it, and he said, "I've never read a book like this. I don't even know how to approach it. I don't know what to do with the text." And I think that is an experience that I don't know if is that. Can I ask? Is that an experience that all of you have had?
Yeah, I kind of feeling I'd be more comfortable with it if Bloch were Austrian, because if he were Austrian, it would be funnier. I mean, if he were a Viennese writer, and he'd be like Krauss or something, there'd be a kind of a knowingness about the bombast.
Yeah.
Whereas, as it is, I mean, it is pretty barking in parts.
Yeah.
When he started going on about the carpet.
The carpet, yes, yeah, exactly.
It's the carpet that goes on forever.
What is that? Yeah, it's flying carpet. Yeah. There's bombast in it. Yeah, there is, as he says himself, überschwängliches Pathos, an overflowing pathos. Part of that is expressionist aesthetics.
Well, I think that's one of the problems with the text, because it kind of presupposes much more kind of art historical knowledge than I've got. I mean. And it's sometimes, it seems, I mean, like when Adorno's writing in a similar fashion, I mean, you know what music he's listening to and you know what he's talking about. And there's something very, it seems to have some kind of expressionist art in mind, or some kind of Bauhaus type art. And this is actually before Bauhaus, isn't it?
Yeah, so I've got some, that's why I did some show and tell work with the PowerPoint. I put some pictures together that we can look at of Bauhaus and other things, and that we can try to work out what it is actually that he's talking about.
But at other times he seems to anticipate Heidegger or that poem of Brecht from Helen Werken.
Yeah.
Of all the works of man, I love the most. That poem.
Yeah.
Which kind of corrected the Heidegger, but the Heidegger was still looming there, like Spengler, as you said earlier.
Yeah, there's a Spengler element. But it's, of course, in Heidegger, I think personally, but I've got no proof of this, that Heidegger was much more influenced by Geist or Utopie than he doesn't talk about it at all. But key concepts like Sorge, and also in this first chapter, the emphasis on wohnen, on dwelling. That we don't know how to dwell, we've lost the art of dwelling. This whole notion of place, which comes out very, very strongly in the beginning of Geist or Utopie, and of course it is a book about the non-place, but it's conceptualized in terms of in this first part, that there's an aesthetic of place that feeds through everything. Also in the choice of words, we'll look at some of that in a minute. I think that's all. Either it is something that they were all talking about, or there is much more of an influence of this book than we know. And I actually think it is that way, because before 1918 you don't see people writing about these things. And it is, and all the key terms, all the essential concepts are in the 1918 edition. And that's before Heidegger, Benjamin, or also Spengler. I think Urban was Spengler. Yeah. before that, those things were published. So I think it is quite a unique and strange and weird book in many ways. Yeah. But yeah, so there's bombast in it, and there is expressionist language in it. There's also maybe what I found. Somebody asked me, "What's this book about?" And I just realized that I couldn't give an answer to that question. It's something happens in the book, or something is attempted. There's an attempt made at describing something that happens in this book. But what it is very strange. And in a way, it reminds me most of contemporary philosophy and what Badiou means when he speaks of an event. There is something that remains indiscernible, but that yet elicits a practice, a theoretical practice, but also a practical. It was a praxis of fidelity to that, what happened, but what it is remains unclear. And you see that sort of in the Absicht, in that first text, that it ends with incipit vita nova, which is the Dante reference. Dante saying, incipit vita nova, the moment he saw Beatrice and fell in love with her, and his whole life was a search to get back to the one that he never had. Yeah. That dynamic, which also later in Principle of Hope is so important, that Heimat is something that we've had an inkling of in childhood, but nobody's been there, and so we're trying to go somewhere where we've never been. That also is here, but of course in Dante there is a very clear event that sets this new life in motion, which is the apparition, the moment, this epiphany of love that Dante sees when he sees Beatrice walking in the street. And you could ask yourself, what is that moment of epiphany here? And that was maybe a question to start with. So I thought what we could do is just go through sort of chapter by chapter with the sections that we've read and really discuss and see what you've come up with as points for discussion. So maybe we could just first look at that little text Absicht. We already started with it last week. And here you see, of course, the context of the First World War. That is the background in this book. Yeah? There is a situation described, and maybe that is the event that it starts out with, and in that sense it's much more of a war book than we imagine, of a situation in which really the world of Geist, the world of thought, has been completely corrupted, and people have died. The ones who carried hope died, and the other ones, the mediocre ones, have been left behind. And so it starts from a situation in which nothing is left. Everything has become empty in an existential sense, but also in a cultural sense. And after the war, the revolution came, but the revolution, this is not the Russian revolution that he speaks of here, but the German revolution, Karl Liebknecht's announcement or pronunciation of the Socialist Republic in Germany, which was of course killed off very, very quickly. And then he says the universities have become graveyards of the spirit, and the unproletarian youth has become roh und dumm wie nie eine zuvor. A little bit further up, die Maler haben die Zwischenhändler verteidigt, den Anstiftern das Hinterland warm gehalten. Lichtloser war nie ein Kriegsziel als das des kaiserlichen Deutschland. Ein stickiger Zwang von Mittelmäßigen verhängt, von Mittelmäßigen ertragen. Der Triumph der Dummheit. That's the situation in Germany. And in this situation, and it spreads out all over the West, we see reactionary movements coming back. We see a return to Romanticism, which forgot the peasants' war, as he says. We see expressionism, and I think we have to realize the book is written at a moment when expressionism is disappearing, and neue Sachlichkeit, new objectivity, is on the rise. So I think that's also why the relation to Bauhaus, which you already mentioned, is very complex here. You can't say that Bloch wholeheartedly affirms the aesthetic of Bauhaus, but at the same time he's not as negative about it as some people think. But we'll get to that in a minute. But in this situation, which is one of cultural decline or cultural deprivation and annihilation, and there you see, I think, a little bit of the structure, but what remains is the eternal problems. He says, die ewigen Probleme unserer Sehnsucht, unseres religiösen Gewissens brennen fort, nicht minder ungebeugt, nicht minder uneingelöst in ihrer absoluten Forderung. So, the problem that he wants to talk about here is the eternal problem, the problem of how to live, the problem of what to do. And that problem is the same as it ever was. But that problem now comes to the fore in a situation in which culture, as it were, has reached a point zero. There are some parallels maybe to the situation here and the situation that's described by Adorno right after the war, the Second World War. There's also this sense of catastrophe, this sense of we're now living in as Adorno says, some people talk about the catastrophe if that were to happen, but what are they waiting for? How can there be something worse than what has already happened? You know? But he says, okay, so this is how far it had to come. This is how far it had to come, and then in line with the beginning of this section where he says we have to take up life in our own hands, he says, yeah, okay, now we're going to make a new beginning. And I find that quite astonishing on page 13 of the German text. Wir haben Sehnsucht und kurzes Wissen, aber wenig Tat. Und, was deren Fäden miterklärt, keine Weite, keine Aussicht, keine Enden, keine innere Schwelle, geahnt überschritten, keinen Kern und kein sammerndes Gewissen des Überhaupt. Hier nun aber in diesem Buch setzt sich genau ein Beginn, neu ergreift sich das unverlorene Erbe, wie das Innerste, das drüben hier wieder leuchtet, so ist es kein feiges als ob, kein wesenloser Überbau, sondern es hebt sich über allen Masken und abgelaufenen Kulturen das eine, das stets Gesuchte, die eine Ahnung, das eine Gewissen, das eine Heil, hebt sich hervor aus unserem dennoch unzerrissenen Herzen, aus dem tiefsten, allerrealsten unseres Wachtraums, aus dem letzten, das uns blieb, aus dem einzigen auch, das wert ist, zu bleiben.
That section that you just read is in the 23 edition here?
That's the 23 edition on page 13, yeah. And that's one sentence also. Most of the sentences, I think the translator has chopped them up a little bit, but most of the sentences are at least 1/3 of a page.
Yeah, because in the 1918 edition that bit is much more cut.
Yeah, in the yeah, exactly, yeah. But you see a lot of, and this is one of the difficulties getting into the text is how to read some. You see here, I want to point out some words that I think are important in this little section. There is the word Weite, which is probably maybe translated as breadth or broadness, or I don't know what it is. I should have the English translation with me as well. And that's a very important term for Bloch, and we'll see that coming up time and time again in the text. Weite, broadness or breadth, is contrasted usually with another typical and very charged term that became even more charged in the 1930s and onwards, Bodenständigkeit. Bodenständigkeit meaning being realistic about things, being grounded, but of course also referring to the Boden, to the place where you live, so also is also connected semantically with connotations of the place where you belong, your nation or whatever, and became a key word for the fascists in a way, Bodenständigkeit. Bodenständigkeit and Weite are contrasted by Bloch all the time, but as with everything, he doesn't say Weite is good, Bodenständigkeit is bad. It is about the relation between the two, and it's the Boden can only become what it is in the light of the Weite, and also the other way around. So that's an important term. Another important word, and maybe words are the only way in which we can start to read this text, is the word Schwelle. So this idea of a threshold, which comes back time and time again. Living authentically, although he doesn't use that word, but living authentically means living at the front of process, at the front of the event. So that's another word. Dann ein Sammeln des Gewissen des Überhaupt. That is what this book is really about. Ein Sammeln, which is a putting together, a Gewissen, which is a conscience, in the sense of not in the sense of an awareness, a consciousness, but in the sense of a conscience, which has the word Gewissen can have a moral connotation. It doesn't have it here, but it's a matter of page 13 of the 23 version. It's a matter of you might say non-thematic awareness, a non-thematic orientation on something, which is different from analytical thinking, but which nevertheless is real. And in a very late interview, he talks about philosophy as Eingedenken, a remembrance or a thinking of, rather than a thinking about. So you see that epistemologic, if you want to put it like that mode of knowledge that is at stake in this book is that of a Gewissen, is that of a conscience, to be conscious, to have a conscience regarding something. Regarding what? Well, the Überhaupt. I already mentioned that word, that which is absolute or which is unconditional. Yeah. And so those are important words, I think. Another important word is, or a contrast is between inner, inward and outward, and that's a theme that will come back time and time again. There is as he says further down on the page, there is an internal way, a way inside of yourself, and there's also a way outside of yourself. In the process of realization, utopian consciousness has both sides and needs both sides. And the idea of to think of the goal of history, if you want to put it like that, in terms of a place, in terms of a topos, or in this case an utopos, a topos which does not exist, indicates already that this external, the way outward is a central form of realization of the utopian. The utopian, and this is a very important theme. The utopian cannot be found inside of oneself. Let's say it is not. This is a post-religious discourse in a way. It cannot be found inside of oneself in a world that is untrue or that is not ready. The process of realization is a process in which the inward becomes like the outward, and the outward becomes like the inward.
So this is why he has this otherwise kind of strange and unorthodox dislike of classical art, because of its self-containment.
Yeah.
He prefers the kind of some kind of Baroque unfolding.
he prefers the unfolding.
Can't be contained.
Yeah, which exactly, and this becomes so. The big question we get after this text is, why does a book that deals with Selbstbegegnung, with self-encounter, start with philosophy of art? And it has to do with this point, and not even philosophy of art. I think it's quite unique that this is really philosophy of design. So this first chapter, the Erzeugung des Ornaments, production of the ornament, is a philosophy of design.
So there's a bit in Hegel's introductory lectures on aesthetics. He first talks about a small boy throwing a stone in a pond and observing the ripples, and then he talks about tribal scarification and so on. So, I mean, with a child, it's kind of making the outer inner, and vice versa with the scarification.
That's right. Yeah, that's right, and that's of course that's for Bloch always in the background. It's always that's true, and he talks about the hand, the stone. What's it called?
The flint.
Yeah, the flint. And the knife that's made of flint. In that context, but he specifically also talks about chairs and tapestries, and talks about the difference between making a chair and making a statue, and so we'll get to that in a minute. But it's true. It's this Zug. That's another key word here. A trait or a streak. That word comes back time and time again, all throughout Bloch's writings. Zug, and that's also a Heideggerian word. So when Heidegger talks about the Sinn von Sein, then he talks about that as a Zug, a trait. Something that pulls us along, and this pulling along, a Zug also means train, tuk-tuk. This pulling along, the Zug is that movement by which the inward becomes like the outward becomes like the inward, and in art it is what Bloch refers to as the Gothic. This is how he contrasts classic Greek, the Greek as he calls it, or the Egyptian, with the Gothic. That's what we'll get at in a minute. In which the question is very interesting from a contemporary, from the point of view of the time in which he writes. Does Bloch subscribe to a neo-Gothic aestheticism, which was rife at the end of the 19th century, which created some of the, in my view, some of the most abysmal buildings that they still didn't manage to bomb in 2 world wars. I don't know if we'll have to see what the verdict is on that. But so inner outer Zug as a key word. Another key word, Ahnung, a premonition or a hunch. And then also the word Wachtraum, so daydream. In the chapter on Don Quixote, in the 1918 text, Der komische Held, the comical hero, is a text about Don Quixote. It's a text about the daydream and what it means to live in a daydream. Don Quixote is of course criticized by Bloch. He says we should not go the way Don Quixote went for obvious reasons, but nevertheless we can learn a lot from what happens in that book. So we get an inner road and an inner way and an outer way, and it is in the relation between the two that utopian consciousness can start to take hold and to take place. What is not here, but I just want to mention that in terms of inner and outer, there is therefore also a relation between space and time. Later on in Bloch's writings, this is conceptualized in terms of what he calls categories, which are symbolical, allegorical ways of interpreting reality. In terms of the categories of Reich, kingdom, and Exodus, and this is it's got a reference to Judeo-Christian religion, where the utopian, the arrival, is always conceptualized in terms of space, so as a Reich, a kingdom of God, or whatever language you want to use, but there's always the sense of a spatiality, which is a co-presence of distinct elements. So space, we're together in this space, we're not one, we're all different, and yet we share a space. And that is in itself a quite paradoxical thing to try to understand how you can make sense of that. But the utopian has that character, it's an extensionality. The way towards it is that of a constant transgressing, a constant going over the threshold into something new that wasn't there yet. There's a movement into the new, and that is what he conceptualizes under the term exodus. So a moving out of a situation of oppression or emancipation, or in which you're not yourself, into a state in which you are. And so you see that already beginning here. And all of that happens and that's another key term on page 13, the Dunkel des gelebten Augenblicks. That's a key conceptual term for Bloch, the darkness of the lived moment. So in our subjective experience, we cannot, we experience a darkness in the very present in which we live. It is not exactly clear who we are or what is happening in the moment in which we are alive. In the moment we are living now, in the jetzt. It is only afterwards that we can, through mediation, that we can throw light on it. So we're living in a complex situation, which refers very much to Hegel's notion of dialectic, or mediation, which is the same thing, in which the present itself is dark and is in itself, an sich, and has to be brought for itself, für sich, through a dialectical process, a mediation. But that can only happen by installing a distance between the present and the categories of mediation, and that distance is what Bloch sees as the gap in which utopian consciousness is located, because ultimately the utopian would be a situation in which that gap between what I am now and what I have about myself would be closed. Yeah, that's I think, and he sometimes also refers to the gap between essence and existence. I exist, I am, but I don't have myself. I'm not, the categories that would apply to me are not available to me. And in the process of living, or in the process of history, the process of creativity, we are on the road towards that kind of unity between what I am and what I have. So ultimately, the goal, the utopian, another way of talking about the utopian goal is to say a situation in which I have myself, without it being the case that this having is a form of alienation, without it being the case that this having is a form of possession, material possession, or the way I possess a good. That's precisely the root, and Bloch shares this with Lukács and with Marx. That's the root of alienation and oppression, is precisely that we forget about this gap, and we see ourselves or the other person or the social world as consisting of these objectivities. Yeah? And then we forget that we forget amid all these products that there is a process behind it, and that process is incomplete. Yeah? So I think that's a very key point also for Hegel, that the dialectical process is one of externalization and coming to one. The spirit comes to itself by going out of itself. That's in a way the same here, but here it is translated into the context of a theory of subjectivity of existence, of individual existence. So darkness of the lived moment is a key term for Bloch that keeps coming back time and time again. It leads to a whole play throughout his texts on the topic of not knowing who you are. We don't know who we are in a fundamental sense. We don't know who we are yet. The world itself doesn't know what it is. Die Welt weiß noch nicht, wo ihr der Kopf steht. So the world doesn't know where its head is, as it were. And and it also Bloch also talks about this often in terms of the context of the story of Ulysses in Homer, who at one point escapes from the Cyclops by saying, "I'm no one." Yeah.
Yeah, it's a pun because the Greek word for no
yeah,
one.
Exactly. Yeah.
Very like it.
Yeah. Exactly. I am no name. Yeah. And he says that we can all say that. We are all like that. Yeah. And that's also realizing that is also where the escape lies, because not realizing that means objectifying yourself in a forgetful way, in a way that forgets this process, so this gap behind it. Yeah? So utopian consciousness is everything else than painting a perfect picture and trying to get there by rallying the troops and killing everybody who doesn't agree with it. Yeah, it's got nothing to do with that, and that's important to see. So we see already quite a few key terms of Bloch's thinking in this Absicht, in which he says, and that's also in line with his sort of rather bombastic style, that this book is actually the new beginning. Yeah, we must not underestimate that this would not be the Oxford University Press would not accept this for publication today, probably also not then, because he says, yeah, look guys, this is now, and here we begin. This book, and that necessitates the question of how do you read this book.
This is not like the kind of methodological self-consciousness of the phenomenology of spirit, though, right? You have to go through all the erroneous stages. Right? You begin here, and you go through this process. And in that sense, I think also the utopian has a temporal, not just a topological dimension, because you have to undergo the stages of, the erroneous stages of consciousness. You have to embrace, through the labor of the negative, these kind of incongruencies.
Yes.
And only thereby do you advance, if you like. And this is, I think, also the fundamental telos as it unfolds in the book. No?
So whereas in Bloch, all you've got is the gap between essence and existence. This where utopia can live. So rather than working through the entire historical process, some kind of leap.
As yet, I'm not because I haven't read much beyond page 50. I'm not aware that he is proposing that there's a reconciled state at the end that we're definitely advancing towards. No. But the methodological self-consciousness as it unfolds, before we get there, is not unlike what we have in Hegel. It's got a narrative, almost kind of performative dimension.
Yes, definitely, it has a performative dimension. I think that's very, very well put. I think it is different from Hegel, and that's in an interesting and important way, in that for Hegel, there is almost what Bloch always called panlogistic flavor to the labor of the negative. It is more or less automatic. You have to go through it, and then at the end, and it has already happened, by the way. It's not about us, it's about the world spirit. And it has already happened. And we can reconstruct it. So when Hegel sits down to write his books, he says everything in these books that is mine is wrong. And because there's this anecdote where Hegel was having dinner party at Goethe, and Goethe's house, and there was a young lady sitting next to him saying, "How do you come up with all this stuff?" And then Hegel says, "Well, everything in my books that's mine is not true." Yeah? And I think it's quite the opposite for Bloch. There's indeed a text written around the time of Geist Utopie where it says everything that's not mine is wrong. Mm-hmm. And that's also the expressionist element in it. So yes,
I mean, I'm doing this service because when I say that, I mean I think Adorno's Hegel, right? So we're talking about this kind of negative moment, right? We are talking about the incongruencies from which
yes.
proceeds.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I think if you look at Hegel, at Adorno's Hegel, there's very much also a lot of what he gets from Bloch. And there's a chapter in the book later on in which Hegel and Kant are compared, and in which the in which this Hegelian movement is basically affirmed, because all of it is that, but in which he also speaks of a Kantian element that has to be rescued in the Hegelian dialectic, and that is the moment of the individual existence. That's an existentialist moment, in a way. It's Kant, Kierkegaard, Bloch, Hegel, Marx, Bloch. Yeah? There are these two lines coming together, as it were. And so there's always the point where, as he says, Kant brennt durch, so Kant runs off, but also Kant firms himself in the Hegelian context. And that is, so it is, so where Hegel, where the phenomenology or the logic maybe more is also performative, in the sense that Hegel starts with saying, I cannot introduce you to philosophy, you have to start here and now, and then through all the mistakes or all the truth will come out, because it's already there. It's not methodological in that sense, but it is methodological in the sense that it tries to performatively get us to a point where we can also say, now we have to begin, and that is that is the goal of the text, and therefore it ends also with the same beginning that it started with, incipit vita nova. So if you read it, it's a good question actually. If you read it properly, you would at the end of the Absicht be in a state in which you could perceive the new. But that is not a logical thing. It is more than that. Very good. So, okay, final contrast here at the end of that text. Again, a totally expressionist sentence. In uns allen brennt noch dieses Licht. In all of us, this light is still burning. And that's again fitting in the occasion in which darkness has descended over Europe. But in us, in our subjectivity, there is the light is burning, this light of the darkness of the lived moment. Und der fantastische Zug zu ihm beginnt, der Zug zur Deutung des Wachtraums, zur Handhabung des utopisch-prinzipiellen Begriffs. You see this word principiell here, and it's also in the 1918 edition. That will later come back in Das Prinzip Hoffnung, of which there's also a sideline of which Adorno said critically, hope can be everything but not a principle. And you see here that's for Bloch that's not true, and you see him already here showing an awareness of what principle means, but later he has a text in which he explains what the word principle means for him. Diesen zu finden, das Rechte zu finden, dessen Willen es sich ziemt zu leben, organisiert zu sein, Zeit zu haben, dazu gehen wir, hauen wir die metaphysisch konstitutiven Wege, rufen, was nicht ist, bauen ins Blaue hinein, bauen uns ins Blaue hinein und suchen dort das Wahre, Wirkliche, wo das bloß Tatsächliche verschwindet. Incipit vita nova. And the contrast that I want to point out here to you is that between truth or reality and the factual. And I think that is a key point also for Adorno. Is whole, in a way, you could summarize Adorno by saying positivism is wrong, and that's also what begins here. Now, the idea that the facts are not the locus of truth and reality, and that is a very, very, very fundamental trait in Bloch's thinking. Okay, so that is Absicht. Shall we just go on? Selbstbegegnung, because that's where it now gets interesting. This first big section of the book, the self, the encounter of the self, the encounter of self, the self-encounter, starts with the question of aesthetics, or the question of design. So I've brought a picture of this krug. I'm now going to attempt to show to you. It should come up in a minute. Can I get some comments or questions or feedback regarding this point of the krug?
I think.
Oh no, sorry. No. Okay. No, okay. Yeah, go on. Yeah.
Well, it's just that I think Bloch is unfair to Hegel when he talks about Hegel's panlogicism, because the movement of spirit in Hegel, as I understand it, is not logical in the sense that Bloch is critiquing logical. It's logical in a different sense. It's that that the spirit has to move on from one thing to another, and essence must appear. So it's not it's not what Bloch is saying about Hegel that that Hegel is imposing a logic which isn't already there. Because Bloch wants it all to happen within subjectivity. But Hegel is saying that there's another kind of logical development within history which is not so much about subjectivity in that that things happen which don't happen because subjectivity has contributed towards them happening. But nevertheless, there is some kind of impulsion for those things to happen. So Hegel would presumably accuse Bloch of an element of subjective idealism because of that. Because Bloch seems to be relying on the subjective, for these, for history to move from one stage to another.
Yeah. Okay. What do people think of that?
Well, I think everybody's unfair to Hegel. That's what he's for, really. Adorno cites approvingly this contemporary account of Hegel's lecturing, and apparently he had a really thick Swabian accent. He stammered, he stuttered, he was slow and ponderous, and as far as Adorno is concerned, this is exactly as it should be, because Hegel is not the kind of inexorable unfolding of logic. It's a kind of it's philosophy with grazed shins, in which the subject bumps into things and finds that the tools with which he or she was previously equipped no longer work, and so it's a much more the unfolding of spirit is much more crisis-ridden than Hegel's detractors make out.
Yeah, Bloch seems to be saying that we've arrived at a point where, how does he say at the start? Now we have to begin. So Bloch seems to be of the opinion that we've arrived at a stage in history where we can make the transition from the society that we don't like to the society that we do like. And in order to arrive at that conclusion, he seems to be saying that because we've learned to express ourselves in all kinds of ways, in all kinds of different ways, that we've somehow learnt the lessons that we need to learn in order to go from where we are now to the better society. But that seems to assume that what has occurred within human consciousness up to now it seems to assume that that's sufficient to make the journey to the next society. Whereas in Hegel, well,
I'm not sure, if I can interrupt you, I'm not sure that he would say that what we now know is sufficient. So there's no guarantee. And this is one of the main elements is to open up this idea of hope, so that there is a possibility, but there's no guarantee. And that possibility, so the whole theory of history is overturned, because that possibility in a way is always there. And that's something that, yes, you do get that in Bloch, the idea that at any moment in history there is this possibility of affirming the new, living at the front of realization. And he doesn't seem to be saying that there is a necessary historical development from slave society to capitalist society. Now that this is in fact the history in which we are living, you can, looking back, it looks necessary. It's the only world we've got, if you want to put it like that. But he doesn't say that this is what had to happen. And so in the past, this is what he calls the future in the past. In the past, there are things that have not been completed, that are not what they should have been, and therefore they continue to live on.
There's his remark about because he compares Marxists to Jacobins.
Yeah.
And he's precisely Jacobins who were up for every bit of revolt that's been in history. Whether it's Munster or Spartacus or whatever. Whereas a Marxist might say, well, it's only when it's only after a certain amount of development that any kind of justice or socialism is possible.
Yeah. So yes, but Bloch would maybe be more on the side of the Jacobins.
Well, I got the impression from when he talks about it.
Yeah.
In this that he was kind of comparing the Jacobins unfavourably.
Yeah, he's doing that here. Yes, but he does. But so for example, in the Spartacus uprising, there is something there that. So he says later on. I don't know if it was Montesquieu or Robespierre or whoever said it that this was a Spartacus moment. And he interprets that as meaning more than it's like it. He interprets that as this is where that which was incomplete there but which was attempted is now completed in the French Revolution. And so we can go on for the Russian Revolution and other revolutions that still have to happen.
But Badiou would say something very similar.
Yeah, but there is something there, and therefore that past stays alive, and he seems to, even in his more mystical text, seems to indicate that that past actually still is there. So, that, and also in our individual lives. So that person that you should have kissed 25 years ago but didn't, that's still going to happen in some form or another. Yeah? There seems to be that idea, so it goes, it's more than, there is the full acceptance of this Marxist logic of history, which you indicate, but at the same time there is the idea that the utopian, what he calls the utopian, stands, as it were, and I think Benjamin says something perpendicular on history. So history is not just one linear development. It is, as it were, a multidimensional process. He speaks of a multiverse, or also of an elastic time and of discontemporaneity. Is a fragmented, multidimensional process in the light of this idea of utopia. And he even uses the term restitutio in integrum, which is a theological term, the restitution of everything integrally at the end, as a religious metaphor for this. I think that's where Benjamin got that from.
Absolutely. Otherwise you run into the same problems that you have with the Second International, right? You have a kind of a progressivist, developmentalist, plowing forward towards an inevitable success, and every setback that you have on the way is okay, because ultimately everything will be fine, right? And this is of course naive. There's a wonderful section that I want to on later here that reminds me of a section in the
so I think so I think these we have to see that there are at least two modes of temporality. There is the historical, and there is a time of salvation, if you want. I don't want to use these religious words too often, but it's difficult to speak about it in other terms. The time of redemption is a different time from the time of historical progress.
It's the rupture of historical progress, if you want to speak with Benjamin, that just lays the foundation for it very nicely.
Yeah, that's right. So in Benjamin it becomes history becomes catastrophe, and I think Bloch doesn't go that far. It's as if he wants to. Yeah, you think unfortunately. I think fortunately. I think fortunately, because otherwise we all end up shopping at Galerie Lafayette if we're not careful, and having epiphanies as we do so. But that's a very, very clear way of putting it. Where in Hegel's view, in Benjamin's view, you get the moment of redemption as the interruption of history, as the moment in which history appears catastrophic. Bloch tries to, in good Aristotelian fashion, tries to have his cake and eat it. Tries to have on the one hand this strong dialectic of redemption, and on the other hand stick to the idea of historical development.
But he's not oblivious, to the shortcomings of too much of a kind of promise in this development. There's a section here where he talks about the canon of the H-loom, the weaving loom, winding up in the same.
That's beautiful. Did you notice that? That is excellent.
It reminds me of that part in negative dialectics where Adorno talks about the no human history leading to a definite kind of redemption or whatever, but definitely one leading from the slingshot to the megaton bomb.
Yeah. It's the same kind of thing. Yeah. It's a sentence where he says that the weaving loom will stand next to the machine gun or something in the Museum for the History of Humanity. Yeah. But later on he repeats that in actually that's interesting. Later on he writes a book called on Natural Law and Human Dignity, because this concept of natural law, the natural law tradition, is one of the great utopian traditions for Bloch. And there he has a pun on or play on this same sentence, and there he says the code of law will stand next to the machine gun in the Museum for the History of Humanity. I think that's also very, very perceptive comment. Yeah. So, but let's now go to aesthetics. So here you have the Batman book. That's the one actually from Bloch's study, which is still there. I have held it in my hands. They have it on display there. You can't touch it if you say that you're researching, and they let you touch it. And you see the face there on the at the top, and here's the other picture I could find of a collection of other. It's an early mass product, if you want to put it like that. And in the 1918 text, there is no mention of the glass. He begins with the glass, and he makes a contrast between the glass and the picture. In the 1918 text, which is in this sense, I think, to be preferred, he's tinkered a bit with it here, but otherwise it's pretty much the same. It's just the picture. Maybe Phil, could you read for the beginning of that in English?
I am by the picture, thus it leads inside, stands before the wall in the room. The wall is green, the mirror is golden, the window is black, the lamp burns brightly, but the picture is not simply warm, let alone so indisputably beautiful as other fine old artifacts. Such pictures are now often imitated. There is no harm in that, but there are expensive bearded man pictures, beautifully preserved, deliberately sculpted and elaborately fluted, with narrow necks, a neatly coiffed head on the neck, and a heraldic shield on the belly, and they overshadow the simple picture. Who loves the picture, however, knows how superficial the expensive pictures are. and prefers the clumsy brown implement with almost no neck, a wild man's bearded face, and a significant snail-shaped solar emblem on the curvature.
Yeah. Okay, so
This one something
yeah, this is this one. We read this one. This is slightly different. Yeah. Okay, so who has a suggestion of what this Krug does here in the beginning of the text on Selbstbegegnung? What do you think, Helga?
I can't think today. I can't even understand what you're saying. I can't hear you. And I can't. But I could understand you well.
What is the meaning of the picture?
I'm not sure what the meaning is, but it struck me as a primitive object. I wonder if that's connected to something to do with the expressionist policy of the text.
Yeah.
The expressionist celebration of the primitive, as opposed to the readily refined.
Yeah, that's I think a very good starting point. Yeah, there's the primitive and the burger, and that which is bürgerlich, bourgeois, and that's a contrast that he draws right in the beginning of this little text.
The only relation in which this narrative or whatever voice has to the picture is, he who loves the picture and recognizes the kind of less ornate model as the more interesting, the better one.
Yeah.
And it's not just a picture, is it? I mean, it's also the wall and the lamp and the window. I mean, it's
so that is a bourgeois room. Later on, he starts to talk about das Herrenzimmer, the gentleman's room.
It talks about the Biedermeier a lot.
And how it's so difficult today to get a proper study, because the study and the das Herrenzimmer has all become one. But that's, so the Wand is grün, the green, but probably is that some sort of wallpaper. Der Spiegel ist golden, das Fenster schwarz, so it's night. Die Lampe brennt hell. There is a darkness and there is a light. It is all bourgeois world, but also invocative of this idea of the darkness of the lived moment. And there's something that falls out of that world, and that is the picture. Because the picture is nicht nur einfach warm, like the room, oder gar so fraglos schön. It's primitive. Die andere edle alte Dinge. So it falls out of this world, and that is maybe indeed has something to do with the primitive, or also the wild. When he talks about painting later, he talks about the Fauvistes, and he speaks about wildness as a category. So that's maybe one first thing, indeed, that that this is a primitive object. And then he starts to talk about the fact that this object has been imitated quite a lot, so that apparently you can buy mass-produced imitations of it. That leads into the discussion later of the machine that we'll get in a minute. And then he says there are also among the old ones, there are very, very precious ones that are very well made, pleasing, etc., etc. And this one is not like that. I don't really know, but I don't see much of a difference between those two. But that is a primitive version of it. So not only is it's original, and it is more primitive than some of the other originals. It's more primitive than some of those that were already luxury goods. So there is and that will come back when the theme of luxury comes back later on in the text. So this is not luxurious. Expressionism is, as an aesthetic, is connected in a bit on the machine in a bit later on with the anti-luxurious. Yeah. But that's maybe all on the outside. What sort of a connotation does the picture evoke? It's a vessel. It contains
water.
It contains water.
And the water is significant.
Yeah, the water is very significant. Yes. We talked about the water last time. Walking on or putting your teppich on the water so you can float on it. So it contains water.
It's not transparent like the glass.
Yeah, it's not transparent like the glass. I think that's the main contrast with the glass.
Could it be that it is meant to be light?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, in a certain way.
I don't know if this was in his mind, but if I'm not wrong, I think the picture is also a Kabbalistic motif.
That could be, yeah. That's a good point. We should really look that up, shouldn't we?
Did you say Kabbalistic?
Yeah, we should look that up.
I mean, I'm fairly confident. I might be completely wrong, so definitely don't hold me to it. But I have a feeling that there's something about the shards of a broken picture being put back together.
Yeah. That's very, very important to keep in mind. And of course the fact that it has a face.
Yes, it's referring to life.
It's referring to life. It's an anthropomorphic thing, isn't
and
it?
also with when he talks about the more ornate versions, he says frisiert and Hals and Bauch. I mean, those are also technical terms, I guess, to refer to but they are taken from the human form.
Yeah. So the human form and the form of the picture are compared to each other. No? And this picture has a face. So we see again the inward outward in the movement from inside to outside, which also is symbolized in the fact that you can put something in it and you can pour it out. He also talks about the difficulty of finding out what it looks like on the inside of the picture, which is, I think, typically a children's consideration. As a child, I remember if you remember that, but I used to wonder, what does it look like on the inside of a jar or whatever? Yeah? What would it be like to be inside there? Yeah.
And yet he wonders as well and talks about it in terms of socks, right, in the Roman child.
Yeah. Benjamin talks about the sock, the rolled up socks. That when mother does the laundry and rolls up the socks.
Yeah. It's inside of the sock.
You put it out and then it's two socks. Yeah. So that's there as well, I think. And with that, it is also, and this has, I think, to do with the role of materialism in Bloch. It is also maternal. It's a feminine maternal symbol in a way. It's a Bachmann. But the containment and the vessel nature is, of course, reminiscent of a womb. So it is a motif of birth also that plays a role here, I think, and that comes out in the legend that he writes about. So maybe Phil, because you've got such a beautiful, clear voice. You could read that the second paragraph after the one that you stopped.
Okay. They come mainly from the Rhine-Franconian area. Perhaps they are even Roman. At least the clay of which they are fired reminds one of inexpensive Roman pieces. They also echo the Italic sense of form, if much more muscular, even soldierly, and then Nordic, coarsened. And so they wandered from the taverna into the public houses of the German imperial cities, where now they stand, filled with wine, on the shelves along every wall. Here and there, farmers, such as one sees in Tenier's paintings, with broad noses, still wrap their hands around them. Soon they had to disappear, as everything handcrafted has disappeared. What one most notices is the bearded wild man on the belly of this solid northern artifact. With him, a strange thread weaves back to us, for the dead are thirsty and weary, and the little pitcher buried with them soon runs dry. Elsewhere, however, wild men keep new pitchers, magical pitchers filled with the water of life. One usually meets them on lonely hillsides, and even now, mostly in low German areas, such places are still disreputably called Nobiskrug. And the Inn of the Dead is supposed to lie close by. The men tend a herd not far from Erd's well, from which the golden water flows, and no doubt they direct the souls of the dead so that they will not miss the way home. Hence, the wild man holding an uprooted pine tree in his hand can still be seen on signs outside inns, and similarly, for he knows and guards the secrets of the eternal treasure, on coins and paper currency. Most often, however, one sees him in allegorical form, bearing the coats of arms of Low German as well as Prussian nobility. Here, however, on our picture, the bearded aspect of the forest spirit still peers out at us. The dark, moist, primordial forests have suddenly drawn very near, and this gigantic troll's head radiates his faunish, amulet-like, alchemical image. They speak to us, these old pictures, from a time when they say the long-eared hare could still be seen dancing with the fiery man on Hessian fields before nightfall, and they preserve the old things like farmers, literally.
Yeah.
Is Waldschratte a word Bloch had coined?
I don't think so, but I haven't been able to find it anywhere.
Waldschratte?
No, forest spirit. It's a kind of this is also about life and death. Yeah, this is about it's about the moment, the subjective moment. It's what we are. We are this picture, but it's also connected to the question of death, the question of a life after death. You have to go now. Yeah, that's fine. No problem. Yeah, they have to go. Yeah. As well. Yeah.
Sorry.
Never mind. Thank you for reading so beautifully that.
My pleasure.
That paragraph. Yeah. Okay. I lost my train of thought now.
Life and death, afterlife.
Yeah, bye. Yeah. So there is a. So I said there is a. The picture symbolizes the relation between inner and outer. It develops an anthropomorphical symbol. And one of the things that you might say of Bloch's philosophy as a whole is that it is open to the danger of anthropomorphization of nature, of course. And Bloch writes about that in another book and says, yeah, but that's not so bad because what else have we got? And that is something that I think comes back here. The fact that the outside world can be is alive or has an inner subjective dimension that just as our self-experience. But it's also connected, and that was the point I think of the myth or of the legend. It is also connected to the promise of a life after death. It is in that sense. Well, maybe I can't go into that right now. We have to read a bit more in the book. But it is in that sense. It runs ahead. It's a foreshine. It's a premonition of an idea that comes back later, and that is that in this, connected to the discussion we just had on historical time and the time of redemption, that in the process of realization, in the process of expression, there is something within the core of subjectivity that does not enter into that process, and so there is a darkness that remains completely dark, that is not part of historical process, and that is an inaccessible space, which nevertheless has to do with what might be, as Levinas says, the idea of the possibility, or a promise, not even a promise, but a possibility of life after death, of there being something beyond death. That's for Bloch, I think, an important motive that is connected to this principle of hope, that there is a way in which what is beyond death is a perhaps, or is a peut-être. He quotes Rabelais, who says at some point, the last words of Rabelais apparently were, I'm going to look for a big maybe. I'm going to look. Je m'en vais chercher un grand peut-être. I think Levinas, who has read Bloch, and his last lectures have been on Bloch, talks about that element of the core of subjectivity that does not enter into the process of realization, and that has got to do with the thematic of death as the strongest anti-utopia. That's something that will have to become clear later on as we go on, but there is here definitely an element of the picture having to do with that which takes us beyond the grave, you know? Apart from the whole historical context, and importantly, at the end of that paragraph, that those things which have been preserved in a Boyerish, as peasants do, namely literally. So there is an element of literalness which is undoubtedly linked to the primitive notion. There is an element of literalness in the story of the wild men who manage and have available these magical pitchers with the water of life and the golden water. There is an element that's obviously allegorical. He uses the word allegory, but there is something about that has to do with literalness. There's something about that has to do with the fact that we're actually talking about what happens after death. So that's maybe about that legend, and then there is the final paragraph of the text, and that begins with this idea of what does it look like on the inside, and that leads to the idea that the picture itself is closely connected to what is childlike, and therefore the child, or the childlike, the that which we experience in our childhood, becomes an important element of the symbolic meaning of the picture.
I was going to say just quickly at this point, if I may, just because we're on it right now.
Yeah.
What you said about the literal and the allegorical, I think, is important in this regard, particularly in the question of mimesis and play, right? And the childlike, precisely, right?
Yeah.
Sort of forming yourself einfühlen, right?
Ja.
Nicht nachahmen oder einfach einfühlen, sondern so, dass ich darum als mein teilreicher Gegenwärtiger werde, weiter zu mir erzogen, an diesem mir teilhaften Gebilde.
Yeah.
So this play, relation of play, childlike, literal in a way.
Yeah. In which I pull myself up on the object, as it were, and that's of course this creative relation. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Thank you for that. That's very important. And then, so I mean, I think we can say, Adorno's also said this about the story, that it continues to give insights, and as we go on, you can go back to it and see it. It's like in this whole ocean of this book, it is like a port to which you can always go back. But I think in moving to the next section, at the end, I think there's a very important remark here. He talks about this how these pictures were made, and the fact that they are part of a concrete, almost pre-modern communal context of life, which is contrasted with machine production in the next section. But then he says at the end, these are not works of art. They have got nothing artistic about them, but a work of art would have to look like this in order to be one. I think that's what it says. Das ist keines. Der alte Krug hat nichts Künstlerisches an sich, aber mindestens so müsste ein Kunstwerk aussehen, eines zu sein. Und das wäre allerdings schon viel. And yeah, that's certainly true. So that's a mysterious remark. What can we make of that? That the work of art has to become like this, which is not a work of art, in order to be a work of art. Because that's what it says, isn't it?
I think that resonates very strongly with Adorno's aesthetic theory. I think there's an element in which the work of art has to become complete artifice, right? Kind of interaction with nature and natural beauty, where you have to step outside into the realm of a complete second nature, right? In order to facilitate that which is artistic about it even coming out. There's a weird dialectic between the art and the non-art, when they facilitate each other in a sense. But it's a disproportionate relationship.
Yeah.
Because, it has to become at least like this picture.
Yeah, it has to become at least like that. Yeah, but maybe also something else, or certainly also something else. Yeah. Yeah.
It was like in his attitude towards Ruskin and arts and crafts. I mean, it's like he sometimes sounds like a medievalist, but he uses the medievalism to maybe leap into something which hasn't.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's true. I think this is a very complex point. We'll go to that now when we go to the production of the ornament. He quotes Ruskin once or twice in this chapter, and it is true that he also, in his letters around this time, he talks about a new medievalism and things like that. At the same time, you cannot, I think, you cannot. He's not romantic about the world of handicraft. I personally hate everything that has to do with arts and crafts movement, but he was more sympathetic to it maybe than I am. But I think he is. So Wayne Hudson, in his book on Bloch, writes that Bloch shares with people like Spengler and Müller van den Broek, the conservative revolutionaries of those times from which fascism sprung. He shares with them a hatred of technology. And that is a superficial way of reading this, is that he says the world of craft has disappeared, and what has come into place for it is a world of alienation. But I think that is a very wrong reading of the text that we have under consideration today, because he actually says, yes, that is true, that world has disappeared, and he laments it because he says, what is so great about the loom compared to a small workshop in which people make an honest product and see it from beginning to so that sort of aesthetic is there, absolutely. But at the same time, he has no illusions over the fact that world has disappeared, and he specifically cites Marx. Marx going against the romantic socialists, the world of what's that name?
The Jacobins, I think.
No. The arts and crafts movement.
Ruskin.
Yeah, William Morris. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So he Marx goes against that and says the point of course of all of this is to unfetter the powers of production, to raise productivity levels so that we can produce things that are for everyone, and it seems to me that Bloch completely accepts that, And what he does is actually say there has to be, maybe this is something, this is I think the interesting point, we are now living in a world in which we get mass-produced copies, it's writing towards the beginning of the 20th century, mass-produced imitations of handicraft, of so you get the mass-produced Louis XVI chair, yeah, or the mass-produced. I brought a picture of it. Yeah, here. So I think this is what he is talking about here. That's 19th century industrial table lamp. Yeah. Hand-decorated metal shade. You can buy this today in London, but it's the price is on request, so it must be horrendously expensive. But that is an industrial production of the time in which we are talking here. That is the Jansche table lamp from IKEA, which costs 10 pounds, and that is, I think, what he is talking about in terms of where industrial design has to go. Because he says we have to split. What has to happen is that has to become a split between what can be produced by machines technically, such that it benefits us in our everyone in their daily lives.
Do you have any kind of relationship with the Bauhaus?
Yeah, I'll get to that in a minute, yeah. So, but the Bauhaus is different, eh? So I think he says industrial production, industrial design has to go that route completely, and it's got to stop making that sort of shit, yeah? Because that is just a pure imitation of a world that is no longer there, and that can do nothing for us. It cannot be. It is not a Dialectics im Stillstand. It is nothing. Whereas this has got nothing to do with what Bloch calls expression, but it is functional. And actually, he says that the functional has to become the servant, or is a servant of human beings. And so once that happens, he says, die Bedingungen, on page 23, die Bedingungen der Möglichkeit der Maschine und ihrer Verwendung, so the conditions of possibility of the machine and its application, sind letzthin geschichtsphilosophischer Art, are of historical philosophical nature, eng verbunden, closely connected, mit den Bedingungen der Möglichkeit eines antiluxuriösen Expressionismus. So intimately connected with the conditions of possibility of an anti-luxurious expressionism. So what you see, on the one hand, you get a world in which industrial production creates functionality where that is possible and where it is helpful, and that sets us free, clears away the clutter, in which a proper expressionist aesthetic that talks about the subject can take place. And that is quite different from arts and crafts. And it's also quite different from Bauhaus, because Bauhaus assumed that the world of craft could be integrated in machinal mass production. And Bloch seems to want to say here that that is not an option, if I'm correct. Yeah?
Do you think this is what the allusion is to when he says darin ist auch die vorübergehende Hoffnung in der Wiedergeburt der Form? Do you think that maybe it's the Bauhaus? Yeah. That's the Bauhaus, and because what it leads to is Bauhaus. Because it tries to combine these two worlds, it leads to what he calls technische Kälte. So he says there is a technische Kälte, a technical coldness, that is breathed out by this world of industrial design, and that doesn't go away with the kind of Bauhaus thing, with that kind of. And that's also, I mean, I don't know if you've seen the Bauhaus exhibition last summer here at the Barbican. Again, this is too big a statement to make in an unqualified sense, but you sense the fascism in it, don't you?
you sense the unfreedom in it, in a way. The salvation of the salvation by means of hygiene, as it were, and that is something that Bloch never believes in. He says also somewhere, I only believe in impure mixtures, unreine Mischung. As he says in the beginning of this chapter, that the leading paragraph, the leading motive for the aesthetics of industrial design in our times are the bathroom and the toilet. Abwaschbarkeit, washability. And that, I think that he connects that to technische Kälte. Later on, Adorno speaks of zwischenmenschliche Kälte and says Auschwitz could only have happened because if we were already living in a world in which interhuman relations have become cold, calculating. And I think he connects that with the wrong way of relating to the invention of mass production. This is wrong, but that is also wrong, and in an equal sense. Whereas, I mean, I'm now making a very much of an interpretation, whereas this would be correct, because this costs only £10, so almost everyone can afford it, and it is a really nice shape, which has a human element in it. It is almost like, the thing is alive. You could turn it around, you could play games with it. It could be a little animal or a snake or whatever, and it gives a lot of light, and it clears away the clutter so that you can then make beautiful expressionist painting, like that. Here, that's Franz Marc, Dreaming Horses. That's in 1920 or so, and I think that is for Bloch. Franz Marc is always the expressionist that he seems to like best himself. This one here, can you see it? Träumendes Pferd. But he also talks about Kandinsky and Van Gogh, so I just put two pictures there. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can see that world in combination with the pure functionality of industrial design. That is how he seems to, I think, if I read it correctly, that's what he's saying. He's not saying I wish we were still in the middle of the 19th century. It links in a nice way, I think, to the aesthetics of the GDR. Not that that is in any way commendable, but Bloch was certainly not an advocate of socialist realism. He says later in a text about socialist realism, the problem with socialist realism is that it's neither socialist nor realist. But if you look at this, I don't know if you know Berlin, but there is on the Karl Marx Allee, which was called was the Stalin Allee, but it's now Café Moscow, yeah. Café Moscow. This is just the side of it, but it's a very modernist building. It's a beautiful building, very functionalist. And has got a wonderful aesthetic of its own that is purely in terms of geometrical proportions and harmony, but it creates an open space. It creates a space, a contained space. Bloch is always very weary of this kind of architecture, simply because for him it leads back to what he calls Egypt. And Egypt is werden wollen wie Stein, wanting to become like stone. That's a death drive, it's a thanatos. The other element is the Gothic, that's the exodus, so that's going out somewhere else, and that's where stone becomes alive. And that's a very important metaphor for him. Of course, Egypt is also the Egypt from which the Jewish people had to escape into freedom and into life. And in an old church hymn that Bloch quotes all the time, the New Jerusalem is spoken about as made out of vivis ex lapidibus, made out of living stones. So the Gothic is the moment where stone becomes alive, and the Egyptian is the moment where life or subjectivity wants to become stone. And he sees a lot of modernist architecture as being infused with that desire, and he wants, of course, to say that is not where we should go. But nevertheless, in this kind of an aesthetic, you get a geometrical shape, a geometrical creation of space, which might underlie this principle of the Egyptian. But then on the entrance to the cafe, you get this, you can't really see it here, but you get this magnificent mosaic, which is an element within that, made possible by the space created in a geometrical way, that is fully human, that is full of life, and that is expressionist, that is uses color, and speaks about human life in its unfolding. It's a very dynamic picture. Another one, I couldn't find a picture of it now, was because they now tore it down, the Republiek Palace, the Palast de Republiek, which was also a very functional building, but had this beautiful stained glass window of a socialist young couple with a child, which I think, and there is a later text by Bloch, given a keynote speech given at the Documenta in the early 60s, in which he talks about precisely this combination of a functionalist application of technology to the design of the daily world, and then the freedom that creates for kind of a different kind of art. He then also talks about Marc Chagall's murals in Chicago and also in some other places. So I think that is linked to these things. Here you see another example, strange, I think. That's the Barcelona pavilion by Van der Rohe, which is a classic in modernist architecture, and would for Bloch be almost like a pyramid, all stone. That is the Einstein Turm in Potsdam, which is a much more expressionist building, 1919. It's almost an organic shape, isn't it? In this text, he speaks about building in that way, and he says it's not really possible because, well, in the end, and this, of course, the next step after this is Gaudi, and then you are in fascist territory, but also in a territory in which, as Bloch seems to indicate, the windows never properly lock. It's very, very difficult to with modern technology to create buildings that are shaped in that way and that can nevertheless can use the mass production that is available. So he seems to say we should not go that way. We should go into the direction of a functional architecture, but that should be seen as a blank canvas upon which other things might happen.
How much is that a kind of philosophical principle and simply something to do with feasibility? Because I mean nowadays with computer-aided design and lasers and what have you, I mean these things you can have expressionist windows.
Yes, and I think that's...
So presumably, I mean, Bloch would change his mind because...
Of course, yes. I think that this is a historical discussion. Well, maybe not entirely, but if you look at architecture today, you see this return of the organic form. So we've seen in the abysmal decades that lie behind us, postmodern architecture, a complete alien introduction of ornament in an architectural philosophy that didn't have a place for it really. So what you get in a typical postmodernist building, you get a simple technology used to make spaces, and then a funny little thing on top, or something like that.
Also, my Jefferson's nice little dictator about architecture being a frozen ideology.
Yeah, frozen ideology.
Very
yeah.
telling of how the city works.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that seems it's now we've got rid of that. Now there is an explosion of organic forms in technology. If you look like at the gherkin or even the shard, which is not an organic shape, it is a very asymmetrical shape. On Oxford Street, there is a huge new shopping centre being built in a kind of like a loaf of bread, and I think this will, and many other places. So I think there's definitely a return of the organic made possible by technology. Bloch would not be surprised at that, I think, but it is precisely for the same reason as what he says here. It is technically possible. That it's now done. And it's not ornamentation, maybe.
Can I ask just a question? I don't know if this is a bit of a one-dimensional reading, but what do you think he might have made of, or maybe this isn't really a reference to Adam Bloch's The Ornament and Crime?
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's something I feel of this moderated modernism that survives in thought. So it clings on to some more traditional paradigms.
Well, what do you mean moderated?
It's not quite as staunch as later developments. The laws building still retain something that might have appealed to more of our sensibility more than maybe these other.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, that's certainly true. I think that was also part of his failure to fully appreciate Bauhaus. That it became too stark for him. But not so much in the architecture, in the design of the buildings, but in the interior decoration, I think.
Because the laws, I just looked up, I think that came out in 1910, so it may
undoubtedly it will have been, yeah. I think it's important to ask ourselves, what does ornament mean here?
Yeah.
And what does it mean to speak of the production of ornament? So why does he speak of the production of ornament, of what is ornamentation? Ornament originally means war in war markings. It's the ornamentation refers to the emblems on weapons and shields and helmets, etc. That makes clear where you belong, to which side you belong. So I don't think that is something that's in his background, but that is certainly here. This is another nice one where he talks about the Baroque chair. We'll get to that in a minute. And this is Biedermeier. Why is Biedermeier so important for him? Because Biedermeier, he interprets Biedermeier as the point zero of style. Not in the sense that it's ugly necessarily, but in the sense that this is after the Baroque, after all this abundance, design brought back to its minimal aspect, and so he sees a direct parallel between Biedermeier and Neue Sachlichkeit. That's the same thing for him, and so I looked for a picture of a Biedermeier piece of furniture that can maybe convey something of that, and we see it here. This is a Biedermeier table, and it could have come out of, apart from the curved legs. It would not look strange in a Bauhaus interior. I think it's very sleek. It's very simple. Even the way, I mean, if you look at how it's constructed. Not that I don't know anything about furniture, but if you look at how it's constructed, it's got the legs just run up all the way to the tabletop, which is just simply put flat on top of it, and these panels are simply, visibly put there the way you can see. There's a little functional extra tabletop in between. The only element of play in it is the curvature of the legs. So it's very. I think it's personally, I don't know much about these things, but I thought it was quite a remarkable example of what Bloch is talking about here. There's a parallel between the steel design, let's say the Barcelona chair, and this one. I should have done that, but if you put Van der Rohe's Barcelona chair next to this one, that's almost the same thing.
But in a German context, wouldn't the very mention of the word Biedermeier, suggests not just interior design, but a whole, ideology and.
Yes, of course, yeah, of course, and that's also that's true, and I think that's there in the background certainly. That Bloch sees in the move from expressionism to new objectivity. He starts with that in the Absicht. Expressionists have put on the brake, he says. In the move from expressionism to new objectivity, that's a reactionary move. That's how he sees it, and it's for us almost impossible to experience it that way. When we compare, let's say, Franz Marc or Die Brücke or something like that to Mies van der Rohe or to any of the Bauhaus things, it's almost impossible for us to experience that as a reactionary, as counter-revolution, if you will. But he sees it as that, because it shuts up the subject and it creates a world of hygiene. So it creates a world in which you cannot live, in which you cannot feel at home, just as much as you cannot feel at home in a Bauhaus house. Yeah? And later on he talks about, he says, yeah, all these high windows, all these windows to the floor that they have, yeah, that only works if when you look outside there's something nice to see, but it isn't nice outside. And so it is an aesthetic that, under the veil of openness, actually withdraws from where the real struggles, according to Bloch, lie. Now, it is an aestheticization, and in that form an escapism, and in that sense also an idealism. It loses the material grounding under the veil of functionality. I think that's, and that is the same with the Biedermeier.
I mean, what is the cultural significance of Biedermeier? I mean, is it to do with, bourgeois piety or comfort and that kind of
comfort, friendliness, but Gemütlichkeit, but in a very sexless world. That's, if you want to put it like that. A world in which things are not talked about. I think, is that correct? What would you say? What does Biedermeier mean for you?
I mean, this is not official, but it's stuffy and boring.
Yeah, stuffy and boring. Yeah.
Biedermeier, right?
Huh?
Bieder is in Biedermeier.
Yeah, und Bieder, der Biedermann.
Yeah, the Biedermann is in Biedermeier. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So yes, that is definitely kind of kicking against certain things. Yeah.
But he seems to speak very approvingly of ornament. I'm still puzzled by
that's what we need to find out. Yeah, exactly. So what is ornament? What is ornament? He seems to speak very, very positively about ornament, and that is strange, because we have all learned to not like ornamentation. And he also speaks about the misuse of ornamentation, where it becomes facade. And that is the 19th century, also for Bloch. So the interior of the 19th century, the lamp that we just saw, that's ornamentation. And that's ornamentation in the worst sense, because it is facade. Why is it facade in the case of the lamp that we just looked at? Because that lamp has got no other purpose than to give light. It has been produced in mass production in order to do that, and it speaks of that world of mass production, whereas it tries to hide it by insincere references to something that is long gone. It's pure pastiche, if you will, and so it doesn't mean anything. But that is not all that ornamentation is. And I think that is maybe the gist of what Bloch says. If we strip away all ornamentation because we don't want that anymore, that kind of fake mass production, then we get into a purely functional world in which we cannot live because it ceases to be human. And that which creates the relation between the purely functional and the anti-luxurious expressionist element is what Bloch would call ornament. Ornament is the exodus form of design, if you want to put it like that. That's how I see it. Ornament is that in the thing which belongs to it, in the object, the artifact, but which is more than its function, and which in some sense is connected to a larger world of significance. So if we look at the Bartmann Krug, that is an example of what Bloch means by ornamentation. The face on the picture is an ornament, but it's not an ornament like the two little lion's heads on the side of a French onion soup bowl, which always seem to be there, but they don't do anything. Here, and we saw that in the story of the legend of the wild man and how the thing came about, what it meant. There is a symbolic meaning, or however you want to put it, or there is something going on with the artifact in the world in which it lives, in which it exists, that is highlighted or that is made available for experience in the ornament. And that is, I think, the kind of ornamentation that he is talking about here.
Like a playful embellishment that you sort of thrust upon this empty canvas that the modern object could be a modern mass-produced thing, that blank canvas that you mentioned where something playful could happen.
Yes, well, that's a good question, because it can either be in this sense of a free playfulness. It can also be in the sense of an inherent, maybe a more intrinsic meaning of the object.
Well, it does say at some point, I mean, I'll read it in English.
Yeah.
Something about make great expression rule, moving ornamentation into the depths again, and granting pure signs of understanding, pure ornaments of resolution to the sounding of our inner care, above the silence of the outer. So rather than ornamentation being a superficial, surface phenomenon, it's not even visible anymore. It's gone right, well, I mean, right into the subject, as it were, and because it's completely. Because he talks earlier on about the reconstruction of this star, the Earth, the abolition of poverty, delegation of tools to machines, etc. And under those circumstances, ornament can kind of move into the depths and kind of come out again in kind of pure expressivity or something.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure I've got that clear.
No, I think you're right. Yeah, it is not. It's definitely not an embellishment. Or it wasn't. It's not something external that is added to give it give it a bit of flavor or something. No, it is that. It allows a subjective identification between the artifact and the user, as it were. But it's more at the same time than a humanly designed technology. So if you have let's say if you have a phone that is shaped in such a way that it fits nicely into your hand, then that is functional. You might say, and that's how a lot of, let's say, Anglo-American industrial designers think. The product has got to, because you can't find a straight line in this country, in design, that people don't like it. You could also say, no, the phone is functional if it is as simple as possible, and that would mean that it's straight. Those are two different ways of thinking about what a functional way is of shaping this particular artifact or object of use.
Given that Bloch stops talking about hands in the second paragraph of the book,
yeah,
I think we know where his sympathies lie.
Well, I wonder. So I think his sympathies definitely lie with the one that would be shaped to fit in your hand, but I don't think he would call that already the level of ornamentation. And I don't really know whether he would say that is already ornamentation or whether that is still functionality, and the ornament is something else. It's not an embellishment of the thing, nice picture drawn on it or something, but it's something else.
Kind of subjective, a trace of subjectivity on the artifact itself.
A trace, yeah, that could be it. Yeah, yeah.
External inscription forms of internality.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that is something that would definitely come into it, yeah. Which we also do. We give our artifact, we put little chains on it that are our own and things like that. Yeah, we do that instinctively.
You see that as a positive thing.
He would see that as a positive thing, yeah.
This is a kind of mass-produced artifacts or objects which have ornamental characteristics.
Personalized.
Yeah, personalized pottery.
Personalized pottery. Yeah, no, that can't be it. No.
I wonder whether you can talk about functionality of things like languages, in fact, or computer languages. Is this a possibility?
Yes, I think definitely. Yeah, that's also a level of functionality. Yeah. And in the language, there is also, of course, ornamentation is also a rhetorical term.
Actually, what came into mind was this Esperanto, which has been a complete disaster. It was designed to be, a universal language, easy to use, and it is, I'm told, that anything but. That's what has happened, where nobody's taking it on, except that now it has become a cult thing, and like a secret language for secret societies and around the world, people who know me. But in terms of what was the intention, it was a disaster. So there was absolutely what was meant to be a completely simple thing ended up with being a completely useless kind of thing. So that's why I thought, that you're going to apply, that way, think of that way, functionality of even a language. But then this is controversial, isn't it? I mean, sure, trying to say that English is better than Spanish or German or whatever it is that is more functional. I mean, then, but again, it's a matter of opinion. So I don't know. I mean, who is to judge in terms of its real functionality? Would you say, can you say that one language is more functional than another? I know one or two languages which I'm aware of, which are very beautiful poetic languages, like my own language was born in, but it just cannot do things like science or even philosophy. It will be very, very difficult to do. So in that sense, I could say that language is not functional in a certain sphere, but functional in the poetic sphere. So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Bloch's language is itself a testimony of the fact that language can be highly personal and still talk about general or general things. Yeah. And that language is also has ornamentation in it, but not ornamentation in the sense of embellishment. So there is, yes, a tone of bombast in this, but it is at the same time more than that. He's saying something the only way in which it can be said, and that does involve a level of ornamentation. I think in order to understand what ornament means, we have to look at these three stages that he seems to work with: the Egyptian, the Greek, and the Gothic. Because what ornamentation becomes what it is in the Gothic aesthetic for him, and it is an aesthetic of the line. It is an aesthetic of the living line, as he calls it. He talks about in this section on drawing, there's a section there on drawing, in which he talks about the line, and he talks about also revitalization of the Gothic, as it were. This is where we get into this here of neo. I don't think he's in favour of that at all, the neo-Gothic, but that's just a late reactionary form. But he speaks about this line, the Nordic line. He speaks about the patterns and the figures that you get in Nordic emblems, like dragon heads and the Celtic symbols that we know, where you get these elaborate plays of lines. And I had to think of the fact that they are so popular these days as patterns for tattoos. You know what I mean? Yeah. What? But they are very popular, and I've often wondered what it is that makes them so popular.
Undeveloped aesthetic sensibility.
Yeah, maybe that's it. But as a sociologist, we should look a little bit deeper than that. So it's that element of the line, and I think we need to first understand what he means by that. So the Egyptian, as I already said, is always this element of becoming like stone. So I put up a picture of an Egyptian pyramid, in which the purely geometrical shape. There's a long elaboration here of the meaning of the fact that in the original Egyptian temples, the columns, as you can't see that here so well, but the columns were always facing on the inside. The outside was completely walled off, and the columns are on the inside. There is something that is not to be seen, and the space inside the pyramid becomes smaller and smaller as you crawl in, until that place where the body is actually then balmed and also not allowed to decay but mortified, or petrified in its own way, is very, very small compared to the large structure which is maybe representative of a deity or something like that. So you get a world that becomes stone and wants to become stone, and according to Bloch in this text, this is fueled by a fear for death. So the fear of death can only be conquered by wanting to become dead. I think that would be very interesting to compare that to what Freud says about the death drive, where I think the motivation is a little bit different, but the outcome, and also in certain psychopathological conditions, you can see that the outcome of certain types of neurosis is a kind of petrification, as in the obsessive compulsive. Freud also talks about obsessive compulsive as a form of living like a dead person. So you see that in Egypt for Bloch. That is the Egyptian. It is linked also to the topos of astral mythos, so astrology, and that's actually last term when we had our Italian friend Gianluigi here. He or maybe I don't know if you were there, but he was here at the IGRS, wrote a book about Machiavelli, and showed that for Machiavelli, astrology always is the enemy. He believes in astrology, but it is fate. It is that which excludes the possibility of freedom, of human action. And I think Bloch sees it in that way too. He shows cultural awareness there, that the astrological, the astral, the myth of the astral has got to do with what is overpowering, what suppresses or cancels out subjectivity. And then the second element the second form of aesthetic that he works with is the Greek, and he says Griechisch. So he sums it up by saying in Greece is always nice weather, schönes Wetter, which is a typical Blochian way of speaking, because what he means by that is that everything becomes superficial, and that's of course a very big statement, but not without precursors in the German tradition. Nietzsche had already said that there was this veneration of the surface in Greek aesthetics. Of course, it's the whole play of Apollonian and Dionysian there. But for Bloch, that is what seems to be most important, that a sense of harmony is created between death and life, between Weite and Bodenständigkeit, between all these oppositions, between order and chaos, in a form of superficiality in which everything becomes beautiful. And therefore he says the form is therefore, as we all know, in the form in Greek aesthetics is the contained form that is defined. And he has a very interesting reference to the idea that the torso of a Greek sculpture can appear to be more finished than or more complete than the complete statue. He already writes that in the 1918 edition. In the 1923 edition, he gives the example of the Venus, the Milo, where he says that she actually looks, the statue is complete with all the missing, it's complete with all its missing parts. And that has to do with the fact that ultimately the Greek degenerates back into the Egyptian. The Greek aesthetic cannot resist the world of stone. And he says the same thing about the functionalist aesthetics of new objectivity. It goes back into, it regenerates back into this world of stone. We won't go into the details. But then there is the Gothic, and that is where this element of Exodus comes in, and that's where everything changes. And so for him, it is not that we have to not go back to living like people at the time of the Gothic cathedrals, but that is where you see the introduction of the truly utopian moment as a moment of a process coming in. In all art is utopian for Bloch, but in Egypt the utopian is to become like stone, is death as a state of non-movement. In the Greek aesthetic, the utopian is the contemplation of a perfection that's already there, and which in imitation or participation can be realized in matter imperfectly, reminiscent of a perfection that is not material. It is already there. That is the essentially contemplative stance of the classical world. When, with the infusion of Christianity, apparently according to Bloch, you get this idea that the utopian becomes something that we are on the way towards. And it is being on the way towards that is exemplified in the Gothic Linienführung, the Gothic way in which lines are being drawn, because they are drawn into infinity. And that's, I don't think all these things are terribly new, or maybe not even terribly subtle, but that is how he seems to conceptualize it here. So there is a form, there is a Gothic line which is endlessly varied and which can go into all directions, which becomes indeed the Baroque, but there it goes beyond itself, it loses its containment, and there's also therefore a different, but I did think there's a different appreciation of the Baroque from what you see in Benjamin. I did think when I read this, I thought, yeah, Benjamin read this before he wrote about the Baroque, and I think that's inspired him to some of his corrections.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I also think it's interesting. It's a shame we didn't talk about it last time. This conversation between Adorno and Bloch is something's missing, because precisely to Adorno and Benjamin, the utopian would emerge ex negativo from the Baroque, from the mortification. Right, it's becoming stone is precisely the kind of moment where the kind of promise of happiness that connects people now is fulfilled in the moment of breaking, of transgressing it. Right? It's from the dead that the living in negative form kind of emerges, and to try and kind of approximate it, positively, right, a shape of perfection somehow, mimetically, if you like, would be to always place it on the side of that which nearly is, right, already. So in a way you can never fulfill this promise, right, of a reconciliation with nature through the approximation of a natural form. And I think this melancholic, mortified approach to the Baroque, in a way, I think is maybe more, because what you just said about the Christian time of towards on the road towards salvation, I think is important. I think it's precisely through kind of Augustine that we can read the kind of bad progressivism of something like the Second International. So you're always already on the road to an inevitable salvation. And I think it's precisely when you pull the emergency brake, when you brush history against the grain, when you step outside into the kind of allegorical Baroque realm, that you can read the living ex negativo from the dead, rather than directly as being there somehow. You know what I mean? I think this would have been Benjamin's objection to, and with him, Adorno's objection to Bloch. So I think this moment of deadness, it shouldn't just be, written off.
No, and it's not. I think it's certainly not, because the moment of death, as I already said, is the strongest anti-utopia for Bloch, and therefore is also the point that is has to be taken most seriously, and falls falls out of the moment, out of the historical process, but therefore only shows what it really is, and death is in every moment, is not at the end of something. So I think that is all there, but it needs to be brought out, and it leaves it will come later on, but it still leaves this question open of the Gothic, because I don't think the Gothic, the way that Bloch talks about it, can be seen as drawing lines to infinity, just without this moment of limitation brought into it, because the Gothic moment is a moment of symbolization, and Bloch does seem to be more on the side of the Romantics in his appreciation of the symbol over the allegory. That is certainly true, but the Gothic work of art, like the Gothic cathedral, is symbolic, and symbolic means that it has this ex negativo side. So the symbol for Bloch is always something that points to something that is absent.
I think it's this phrase here that I was a little uncomfortable with. Vollkommene organische Wesen. Also nicht die griechische, sondern die nordisch-gotische Linie ist das vollkommene organische Wesen.
Where does it? Yeah.
This vollkommene.
Yeah, this vollkommene. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's absolutely that I you know, I mean, I would say with Benjamin it's precisely the fragmentary, you know, this kind of brokenness of it all that's maybe to be stressed. I mean, for me.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that, absolutely, yeah. There is a form of brokenness in this the Englische Gruß, the English Gruß. He talks about that in the Cathedral of Nuremberg. Literally also broke in 1813. Apparently, I read when it fell down, and they had to piece it together again. But this is he talks about it in the chapter on ornament. So in the Gothic cathedral, this sculpture, it's a woodcut of the Annunciation. Is hung up I've never seen it myself. It's hung up in the church like it's almost like a mobile, like it moves around in the. And he says it's hung up there to get this space to sing through this space. So it introduces an element of tonality into it, or a higher register, another register into the space that is introduced by this peculiar object, which is like it's like a pendulum that's hanging in a very peculiar way. Of course, it's full of symbolism, but the importance that Bloch attaches to it is the fact that it's hung up in this space, and yet it is a sculpture. And so I think there is maybe a sense of interruption. There is maybe something going on that has to do with a sense of interruption. Not maybe not in the way Benjamin speaks about it, but certainly as an interruption of the integrity of the space that gives it an expressibility or an expressiveness that goes beyond its immediate form. Another example that from that same church, and he talks about that, is the Sakramenthäuschen, the little sacrament house, which apparently is also a traditional form, made out of wood, built against a column, richly ornamented, again in the symbolic way that Bloch seems to talk about. Very ugly, in my view, but the point that he makes is that it's made, and he says the same thing about the other one. It's made of wood, and that's an important element for him. Because the wood relates to stone. Wood relates to stone as life relates to death. I think that's maybe also an element in which the vollkommene organische form has to be understood as at the same time being ruptured with these elements of different materiality, matter, stone, and also different spatialities, and therefore also different forms of lines. It comes back, he compares this to the masks in African culture, masks cut out of wood, and to the totem, and also to the cut beams, cut wooden beams in houses, which sometimes are ornamented with faces or patterns, especially in old peasant houses. So he compares this and also the angel which we just saw. He compares them to those kinds of artifacts, and they have got to do with what he calls the teppich, the tapestry. He says there is something in between a statue and a chair. There is, on the one hand, the statue, which is a pure object of contemplation, it's an object of art to look at, and there is the chair, which is to sit on, and then there is, of course, the wrong chair, which is the industrially produced imitation of a handmade chair. But there is also something else, a chair that loses its functionality, or that is reminiscent by the introduction of ornament of something completely different. It gets another meaning, and he refers to the Baroque chairs, some of the Baroque chairs that were so ornate that you couldn't sit on them, which I think would be a good example of also what Benjamin talks about. I couldn't find an example except for I already showed that to you, the throne of Peter the Great here. So that's where he would sit. Which there, here. This is the chair. Yeah. So you first have to hoist him up there, or it's not a it's not a functional thing.
But the thing is, some of these things, when you just look at them, you might even say that they are not beautiful, but they are horrible.
Yeah, they're horrible. They're totally horrible. Yeah.
That's aspect of it.
I think they're totally horrible, but maybe. And I don't know, but of course I had to contrast it with Philip Stark's the Louis Ghost chair from 1998, which is functional, but also in a way, I don't know if you've ever used it, but you can't really sit on it. It's not very.
It's quite comfortable.
Do you like it? Yeah.
Well, it's comfortable. You can sit on it.
You can sit on it, but after a while you get very yeah.
I don't know.
I don't like to sit on it. It's too yeah. Anyway.
Ghostly.
Too ghostly. No, it's a very nice idea, but it's it has got something to do with that, but I don't know what. Yeah. Maybe you can think of that. But this is not what Bloch means by teppich. But he seems to have the possibility, as in the wooden mask, the animal mask, or in the totem, or in the angels that we just saw in the church. He seems to have an idea of something in between. So a proper function of craft, Kunstgewerbe, höhere Ordnung, of a higher order, in which something else is made available for experience than just functionality or just the vollkommene organische form. We are far over our time. We have to stop.
Yes.
I'm really sorry. But I do want to get through the whole book. So next time I have given you the schedule. We will focus on the philosophy of music. So we'll leave art behind. But you're absolutely right, we should go back to the text that I asked people to read as an introduction to the module, the interview with Adorno and Bloch on the contradictions of utopian longing. So I propose that we start with that next time.
This is just a totally selfish interjection on my part.
No, but I'm just
very fond of it.
I didn't give that text for nothing, and we should talk about it. Yeah. So we do that for next time, plus the pages on philosophy of music that are in your in the schedule that I've sent around.